Welcome to the ICG Digital Academy. Today's webinar is presented by AQR MRS for the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme, the why, the what and the how. The ICG is a hub of nearly 450 independent market researchers within the UK and abroad. We collaborate and share knowledge and experience for the benefit of members, clients and advertisers. Just for those who aren't members or who aren't familiar with the ICG, clients and agencies can find your perfect consultant or consultants through us. Freelancers and small businesses can join us, and suppliers can advertise with us. Today's sponsor is the Talking Shop in Manchester. Thank you so much to the Talking Shop. The Talking Shop is a world-class facility situated in the heart of Manchester. They have 3 gorgeous studios offering you everything you need to host your clients and participants, including both web streaming, picture-in-picture for user testing, and magic marker technology available in every room. The Talking Shop also offer ICG members a 10% discount on their room hire fee. Remember, our webinars qualify for MRS CPD certification. Each webinar is worth 1 CPD hour, so please remember to ask for it if you need one after the session. You can send an email to cpd@theicg.co.uk. You are able to ask any questions by typing them into the question box that you'll see on your screens. We will ask a range of questions out at the end of the session. If yours isn't answered, feel free to email us on admin@theicg.co.uk with your question and we'll afterwards. If you wish to tweet about this webinar, please do so, copying in @theicg. Our next webinar will be announced in December and will take place on Thursday, the 23rd of January. We also have our upcoming event, the ICG Open to All Christmas Lunch, which will take place on Friday, the 6th of December in Farringdon. Tickets are £38 and are available on the ICG website. So now to introduce our speakers, Lynne Chapman, our fellow ICG member, and Debrah Harding, Managing Director of the MRS, who will briefly introduce themselves. Excuse the short delay.
Good morning. My name is Debrah Harding. I'm the Managing Director of the Market Research Society, and I'd like to thank ICG for giving me and Lynne an opportunity to talk today about the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme. I will now pass on over to Lynne so she can also introduce herself. Lynne.
Morning everyone, I'm Lynne Chapman. I started my career with a degree in librarianship and worked in public and school libraries for 15 years. For 21 years I managed to turn a passion for musical theatre into a job by being the administrator of the Stephen Sondheim Society. As well as being an ICG committee member, I'm a recruiter, and this month I celebrate, if that's the right word, 35 years in this well-hidden business. And if I had £1 for every time I've had to explain what this job is, I would be a very wealthy woman.
So today, what are we going to be covering? Well, we're covering the why, the what and the how of the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme, known as RAS. So we'll talk about the background to the scheme, and Lynne will also talk about the recruiter perspective on how the scheme came about and also what it's been like working on the project. We will then talk about how the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme works, and to look then at a little bit more detail of what we've actually developed, and Lynne will show you some of the training modules, and I'll talk about the next steps, and then finally some of the considerations for buyers of recruiter services now that this scheme has been launched. As previously indicated, there will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. So, background to the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme. Why are we doing this? Well, this project initiated within the AQR in 2012, so this has had a very, very long lifespan. And originally, it came about because there'd been a lot of discussion within the AQR about changes in recruitment. There'd been some bad practices that had been noted, that had been coming through, but also there was a feeling that there were an awful lot of brilliant recruiters out there who weren't getting the recognition they needed. And to counterbalance the sort of the bad practice, what was actually needed was a scheme that could recognise great practice. In 2014, the MRS was approached to see if we would come on board helping to develop a scheme. And since then, MRS and AQR have been working together. We have not done this in isolation, however. We have a working group which includes Lynne, who's on the webinar today, but also and representatives from the AQR, but also we have talked to recruiters throughout this process. So we arranged some sessions in London and Manchester, got recruiters together to get their views, as well as then using the small group to develop the actual nitty-gritty of the scheme and to develop the materials. The focus has been to develop for recruiters a professional qualification and the supporting training that is needed for a professional qualifications. The important thing has always been that we need to recognise that recruiters are an integral part of the research supply chain and the research sector, and they should have a qualification and a professional status, as do other parts of research. That has always been the aim of this project, and that has been our focus. But there are also some clear benefits that we see for both research and for recruiters of this scheme. Professional recognition being a key one, that key focus that we've had all along, the professional status that comes with professional recognition. But also the intention has always been that there would be positive discrimination for accredited recruiters. Those that have demonstrated their competence, their knowledge, their skills, and have actually undertaken the effort of achieving a qualification and accreditation should be beneficiaries in terms of being first on the list whenever people are buying recruitment services. Clearly also providing the differentiation from poor practice and those that are providing good practice. I think one of the other things that has come about throughout this process also is the greater understanding of the difficulties facing recruiters. I can personally say from my own perspective that although I was aware of some of the issues, I was not aware of all of the issues until we undertook this project. And by demonstrating what recruiters have to go through and how they have to, the things, knowledge and skills they need to be competent and to be recognised, will, I think, really reinforce the lot of people actually how difficult a job it really is. And actually what we'd also hope that with better recognised recruiters, that also that the quality of recruitment briefs will also improve in terms of that you've got competent recruiters who can push back a bit and say, no, this isn't going to work, and I've got the qualifications to demonstrate that I do know what I'm talking about, and for your advice to be given more credence and weight. But also it does have benefits for research. I mean, for those of you who are buying recruitment services, having access to qualified recruiter practitioners is a clear benefit, in the same way that when you want to get qualified consultants, ICG is the first place that people go, or also having a place for qualified recruiters is key. Having some assurance of that quality recruitment as well. So if you're using people that are accredited, that there is a foundation that you can rely upon in terms of what is being delivered. The way that the recruiter accreditation scheme has been structured is that also that it is linked to the code of conduct, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. So that assurance that the legal and the code requirements are being met, giving that kind of reassurance as a buyer that any suppliers you're using are following the same standards as yourself. And ultimately, what that should do is improve confidence in the research supply chain. The more qualified people and recognised people and suppliers you've got throughout the process, the more robust that process and that supply chain is. And ultimately, what it should result in is better qualitative recruitment, which obviously is also really, really important in terms of protecting participants. But also I think from the research side that there, as part of this process, a reassessment and a reappreciation of the difficulties facing qualitative recruiters, so that there's a little bit more of the kind of mutual recognition of each other's roles and the difficulties of each other's roles. But interestingly, since this process started, and I have to acknowledge this has been a process that we would have certainly have liked to have been quicker than it has been, but we are where we are. And at least now we have made significant progress in terms of having launched the scheme. But throughout the lifetime of the MRS's involvement in this scheme, we have actually really noticed some additional benefits that have come to the fore. The most important thing being that, of course, GDPR has come into play since the introduction of the development of this scheme. And the GDPR is an integral part of the recruiter accreditation scheme syllabus. And the important point, of course, excuse me, I'm just going to cough. Sorry about that. The important point about GDPR is that and this is a big change from the previous legislation, is that the responsibility for GDPR and legal requirements no longer just sits with the data controller, it rests with the entire recruiter qualitative supply chain. So every party that's involved in the development of recruitment and qualitative research have a GDPR responsibility and can be held responsible, and they can be fined for their role within any potential GDPR breaches. And of course, what that means is that if you're a buyer of services, whether it's recruitment or any other research services, you want to reduce the risk that there may be some GDPR exposure. And so actually buying from accredited suppliers, whether in the same way that you might buy from ICG or you might buy MRS accredited suppliers, by buying from accredited recruiters is a way of being able to mitigate the likelihood of a GDPR breach, because you know that as part of the process, anyone who's become accredited as a recruiter will have had to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of GDPR as part of the process. And so that, I think, has been certainly not a benefit that we perceived when we first started, but is a very distinct benefit that has come about since we've introduced the scheme. And interestingly, since we've actually launched the training in September, I personally have had quite a lot of queries from people contacting me saying, I want to be able to access the list of accredited recruiters because I need to be sure that we're protecting ourselves as a business when we're buying recruitment services. So the message is clearly getting out there to those that are buying recruiter services. So that's been a sort of a canter through the key benefits of the scheme. And I'm now going to hand over to Lynne, who's going to talk a little bit more about how she sees things from her perspective, because obviously from my perspective here at MRS, I have a certain view, but it's very, very different when you're actually doing the job on a day-to-day basis. So over to Lynne.
Thank you, Deborah. So basically, initially, I was very sceptical about the whole idea when it was announced at a field conference several years ago. And I put myself forward to serve on the working party, mainly because I was totally against it, but also because I thought independent recruiters should have a voice in the process. And in 2014, at the start of discussions, I did a brief survey of recruiters and got a huge amount of negative feedback. But at the time I wrote, my own feeling is that what is being proposed is not what it's about. What it is about is partly recognition, or the lack of it, of recruiters' important and invaluable contribution to the process, and partly, mainly, about the relationship between recruiters, fieldwork managers and clients, and getting everyone correctly managing expectations, which most definitely is not happening, bearing in mind this was written back then. So far from needing this scheme, what we need is some proper discussion with all levels of the process, and for it to be tangibly and regularly demonstrated to recruiters that they are vital to the process. But during the discussions, I came to realise that, in fact, this scheme has the power to address my concerns, and the Working Party listened well to me, to the things I said. So I do feel we've moved a long way from what I wrote in 2014. Can I have the next slide, please, Deborah? So these are what I see as the benefits, and most of them really Deborah has already outlined, but looking at standardising approaches to recruitment, giving clarity and transparency to the process, more guidance to recruiters, reassurance to clients and agencies, support around GDPR. And something that I feel strongly about, robust training for new entrants into the profession. When I started in many years ago, you were trained by various companies, and that doesn't seem to happen anymore. And quite often you find people just going into the profession thinking they can do it. This way, people will know where they're starting from. Encouraging best practice, and the key thing, professionalisation. So it's a recognised profession and not, as it's currently known, the world's best kept secret. Giving support for experienced recruiters with things such as new and ever-changing methodology, and more chances, again, as Debrah said, for recruiters to make ourselves heard about issues which cause us so many problems. And just from my own experience this last year, algorithms, exceptionally lengthy screeners, and recruitment specs based on quant data, which make every recruiter's heart sink. And giving us the chance to be heard as a body with increased recognition throughout the industry of our indispensable role. Right, I'll pass you back to Debrah, who will explain how the recruiter accreditation scheme works.
So, how is this scheme structured? Well, it's this kind of a four-part scheme that is very interlocking. But I will kind of go through how we developed it. So the first thing that we actually developed was the bottom right-hand corner there, the guidance. So we drafted some recruitment guidance for buyers and recruiters to sort of set out what good looked like, and also to kind of, if you like, set the parameters of what the ethical and legal issues which needed to be followed. So we did that first. The second thing that we did was to create what would be the compliance framework within it. So this is to the top right hand segment. So because obviously the code of conduct, it talks, largely about sort of the ethical principles in the general. It doesn't, it gives you what you need to do, avoiding harm, informed consent, all those kinds of things. But also what it doesn't sort of necessarily say, and so what this means for recruitment is. And so we developed a compliance framework to make it clear about what we would expect for those that were accredited as recruiters. Including all relevant legal issues. And as part of that process, we developed a complaint mechanism, which in effect sits alongside the complaint mechanisms that we have for other participants in the research process. So for researchers and so on that we have here at MRS. And so we have built that compliance framework to sit alongside the scheme, because the important thing, of course, is that for recruiter accreditation scheme to have value, it also does need to have teeth. And if somebody has been accredited, but then are issues that are raised in terms of potential problems, we do need to have an address mechanism, particularly for participants, because if a participant has had a bad experience or something has gone wrong, because let's face it, these things happen, then it is also important in terms of the credibility of the scheme that we've got a way to address those issues. And so in effect, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, when people undertake the accreditation, in effect, that process means that they also become a member of the MRS, which then provides the link into our compliance framework. But the most important thing, a thing that kind of took us the time, really, which is the reason why we've needed the time that we have, is the bottom left-hand segment there, professional development. We've developed a suite of online training materials, which Lynne are going to show you in a minute, that has taken us some time to develop. But of course, it's no point in saying, well, this is what we think a competent recruiter looks like, if we haven't actually provided the learning ability and the learning modules and avenues to enable people to get to the standard that we are setting. So the suite of learning materials is absolutely essential to this process, particularly for those that are new recruiters, not so much for those that are experienced. And the intention is that we will then have a qualification, which will be an online examination to gain the accreditation. Once we have a list of accredited recruiters, there will be an open public online register of recruiters that will be available for inspection by anyone who wishes to, and only those accredited recruiters will be listed on that register. That will include both those that are individual recruiters and those recruiter organisations that may wish to have their whole organisation accredited, because we offer both routes. So in terms of kind of if you like, the step-by-step process, the key thing is to look at the training materials, to do that stage, then to do the qualification. And once you sign up to do the qualification, you then sign up to the quality commitment, which is where the complaint mechanism and sort of link into MRS membership comes from. And then also, if you are you get successfully complete the accreditation, you then become listed on the register. So that's kind of the way it works: training and qualifications, then the link into sort of the quality commitment, the compliance process, and then finally appearance on the register. So we have been very much concentrating on the online training materials for the moment, and the materials that we have developed have been around 5 modules. So we have the Introduction to Qualitative Market and Social Research, Traditional Recruitment Methods for Qualitative Research, New and Emerging Recruitment Techniques, Data Protection and GDPR, and Project Management. And supporting that, we also have a toolkit of useful recruiter information, which includes things like best practice templates and guidance and so on. So, I don't know, if you need to get consent for how to use to do a recording, for example, within a qualitative group environment, there are kind of forms for those kinds of things that can be used as well. Each module contains web pages of content, supporting webinars from some of the leading practitioners, and that was those have largely been drawn from AQR, and also some quizzes that have been built into the online materials to help you test yourself as you progress through the training. It is very important to note that all of this training is free to use for anyone who wishes to use it. It is there, it is in an open website, and you can use it now straight away. There's no fees or anything like that, or any commitment that needs to be done, because actually we also recognise that there may be some people that don't wish to get accreditation but may wish to use the training, and so that's the reason why we've opted to make it open access. I'm now going to hand over to Lynne, who's actually going to demonstrate through some online screenshots of what the Recruiter Accreditation Scheme training modules look like. Lynne, over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. So this is an example of the homepage for one of the modules. As you can see, there's a webinar on the left-hand side, which has PowerPoint presentation slides and the person speaking. You can increase the webinar to full screen and can pause and rewind it, etc. It's a great resource that you can stop and start and dip in and out of at any time. On the right-hand side, you have the list of content for each module. In this module, there are 4 segments, and you can click into each contact heading to take you through into the subheading. For example, in social media and recruitment, you click through, and that will take you to a more detailed page. And on the next slide, we can see an example of a more detailed page. So this one is accepting a project for recruitment. So this is an example of a detailed page, and it's part of the project management module. As you can see, there is detailed written content, because we all learn in different ways, and we all like to access information in a variety of ways. So the advantage of having this dual approach is that if you're a person who likes to listen to content and or look at visual materials such as PowerPoint slides, you can do it that way. And if you'd rather read the information first, or possibly do both simultaneously, the webinar and module pages enable you to do that. The layout for each page is the same, so you can quickly familiarise yourself with the way things look. As you can see here, the webinar is again on the left and the text on the right. And on the next page, we have some examples of a quiz. So for those of you who are raring to go, you can start considering at the end of a recruitment project which of the following is a priority. And if you go into the training pages a little later on, you can find out the answers to that. Most pages of the modules will have quizzes like this. 1 or 2 pages may have limited content for certain module segments, and so there may not be a quiz, but in the main, there are quizzes for every segment. On the right-hand side, you'll notice a button that says Login. The recommendation is that those of you who want to go through the training should register and create an account. The advantage of that is that as you progress through the training, the site will keep track of your progress for you, so you'll know which you've done and which is left to do. It also makes it easy not to lose your place in the process and to know how to proceed, but it isn't compulsory to create an account. It's just a good tool to control how you consume the materials. If you'd rather not create one, then you don't have to. And as Debrah's already said, the materials are all free and they're not behind a paywall. At the end of this webinar, we'll share the URL for the materials and you can then freely access them. And on the next slide, we have an example of some of the answers to a quiz. So with every quiz you do, you'll be told how you've done. For instance, here this person scored 2 out of 3. If you've given an incorrect response, it will tell you what the correct answer is and why the others are incorrect. Quizzes are there as a good way of testing yourselves. Also, if you look at the answers, it's another way of supplementing the available information, plus another way of reinforcing the content of the training itself. And we'll now have a look at the templates in the pack. So here's an example of some of the templates contained in the materials. On the left is a template for gaining consent for audio and visual recordings, which is part of the very helpful GDPR template materials. On the right is a template for dealing with subject access requests, helping you to collect the information and manage the process in a way that is GDPR compliant. Templates are also free and part of the training. You can download them, adapt them to suit your purposes, and use them freely. The only caveat, though, is that they are templates and they are based upon best practice, but they do not constitute legal advice. If there are specific requirements for legal advice in any situation, you must still seek that. Having the templates will at least give you a start point as to what you should be doing for certain types of activities whilst recruiting. So that's a brief overview of the training materials, and I'll now hand back to Debrah, who'll talk about how to get started.
So a good 3-step process on how to get started. So as we've reiterated, you can access the training materials now. They're there, they're ready. There's no need to create an account, but if you do create an account, it enables you to track your progress through the materials. So it can be quite helpful. Particularly if you're not familiar with doing online training, it is a helpful way of making sure that you visit all the pages that you need to visit. For those companies that offer recruitment services, you may have multiple staff that need to undertake the accreditation, and there will be an additional registration process to register all staff and how many you need in order for your organisation to become accredited as a recruitment supplier. And then the final process is that and this is really, really important, is that you do this at your own pace. It's not a race. The materials aren't suddenly going to disappear overnight, or it's limited access. You have all the time to use the materials, and you can dip in and out, and also share it, of course, which is another important thing. We haven't actually completed the recruiter accreditation scheme. We are now into phase 2, which is the final phase, I hasten to add, of the project, which is to finalise the assessment, which is the qualification that we were talking about, which is going to be an online multiple choice examination, which would then enable people to get accredited and then ultimately to renew that accreditation every 3 years. The plan, and this is very much where the current plan, is that we will get the assessment materials completed by the end of this year, so that we can launch accreditations from 2020. And really for us now, this is very much a case of we want to get this second stage done very, very quickly after taking the time to develop the training materials, so that because we know that the market is very receptive and wanting these materials and wanting the scheme. There is a very good reason for why buyers in particular are wanting the scheme, which is to mitigate GDPR risk. There are lots of recruiters who also want the recognition that they are qualified. So we recognise that there is the demand out there. So we're working hard on this to deliver this year. I would also think, and it's really important to emphasise this as well, which is that there is a big difference between if you're an inexperienced recruiter and if you're an experienced recruiter. For new and inexperienced recruiters, completing the online training program would be really, really helpful, going through the whole program, because it covers all aspects of qualitative research recruitment. And that process needs to be undertaken before assessment can be considered. However, for experienced recruiters, they may not be in a position where they feel they need to have any training in terms of like completely comfortable with GDPR, completely comfortable with traditional techniques, new techniques, project management, and so on. For those in that position, it could be a case that they go straight to the assessment process. So once we launch the assessment process at the beginning of next year, experienced recruiters could go straight to that. Equally, if they feel that there is one or two areas that they would just like to make sure and reinforce that they have the knowledge that they believe they have, they could dip into certain modules. And some of the feedback that I've had since the scheme has been launched from experienced recruiters has been that they have found the emerging techniques, which talks about kind of social media recruitment, and also the GDPR units very helpful, because those are the two areas where there is a lot of information to absorb, but also particularly with GDPR, a lot of it is very, very new. And so it's enabled them to top up their knowledge. But it's horses for courses, really, in terms of depending on who you are and where you are in terms of your experience cycle will depend on whether you need some of the training materials or none of the training materials. What I would say, though, for anyone who is considering doing accreditation, is that what you do have is the online quizzes in the training modules, and that's a really, really good way of testing yourselves, because the approach that we've used with those quizzes is multiple choice. So it's either, you're given a statement and you've got 1 to 4 options to choose from, and you have to pick the correct one, or you get sort of scenarios where you're given a scenario and you have to pick whether it's true or false. And that sort of approach is what will be used within the assessment for the qualification and the accreditation. So if you do nothing else, just use those materials to kind of just test yourself, because it's a good way of kind of getting into the mindset of what it means to undertake a qualification. So that's a really a good introduction as to where we are with everything, why we've done what we've done, the progress we've made with the training materials, and the complaint and compliance structures, plus the supporting administration. Next up, as I've said, is to finalise the accreditation process, and we are very much on track for finishing that this year so that we can launch the accreditation early next year. Reflecting on where we are and the fact this scheme has now been introduced, it's also important that we focus on what this actually means for those of you that are buyers of recruiter services. Now, in the short term, obviously the focus from MRS and AQR is the rolling out of the training and the introduction of the accreditation procedure. The MRS regulations for company partners, qualitative recruitment, are currently best practice for MRS company partners. But of course, the MRS Code of Conduct is mandatory for all MRS members. And one part of the code says that members must take reasonable steps to ensure that others do not breach or cause a breach of this code. So for those of you who are members of the MRS, and whether you're working for, or if you're working for an MRS company partner, you have an obligation to follow the MRS code, and that includes ensuring that those that you work with don't breach the code. So that includes the suppliers that you work with. So that is a commitment that's been in place, was in place before we launched the recruiter accreditation scheme, but it's very much where we are at the moment. However, into the longer term, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we want to see positive discrimination by buyers directing their buying to accredited recruiters. And the MRS regulations for company partners on qualitative recruitment will become binding on company partners. And within that, there is a rule which states only use accredited recruiters unless specific and identified circumstances of geography prevent this. We do recognise that there may be some parts of the country where the coverage of recruiter services is more limited. And so the guidance has been introduced with that caveat. Now, clearly, we couldn't introduce this requirement as a mandatory requirement when we've got no accredited recruiters as we are now, but also at the beginning of next year when there will be a handful. But as the scheme establishes and gets rolled out, the aim is very much to go towards the fact that it becomes a mandatory requirement for those that are MRS members and MRS company partners, that they do use accredited recruiters when they're buying their recruitment services. So that's kind of the long and the short term goals of the scheme in terms of how it affects the way that you buy recruitment services. So that was my final slide, and Lynn and I are both on the phone now to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. We've got a few questions that have come in already, Deborah.
Great.
So just to remind everybody before I start these questions, if you have any, you can either put them in the question box or the chat box. Either will work, and I'll pick those up from there. So the first question that we have is, what is the pass rate needed to be accredited, and what percentage do you need to achieve passes?
That's a good question. We're looking at also doing it. It won't be just pass and fail either. So we'll be looking to offer pass, merit, and distinction, because also to recognise excellence. Pass rate would be 50%, merit over 60% plus, and distinction 70% plus. The important thing, of course, is that with the way that we have structured, the way that we're working at the moment to create the assessment, is that every examination paper that is undertaken online will be unique. And what I mean by that is we are developing a very large pool of questions for each of the 5 modules. And when somebody registers to take the qualification, they will be a randomly generated multiple choice examination paper will be generated, drawing the set number of questions from each parts of the syllabus to create a unique examination paper. And the reason why we're doing it that way is that what we don't want is it to become sort of, oh, it's okay, I've taken I know what question 1 is going to be and the correct answer is C, and all that sort of thing, where potential there opens up to gaming of the system. We do want it so that that we protect the rigor and ensure standards within the qualifications, as we do with all MRS qualifications. This approach, by the way, is what we do with all our other multiple choice examinations. This isn't unique, but this is the accepted way of ensuring standards within the way that qualifications are developed.
Thank you. And the next question is, what level of take-up do you expect in the short and longer term?
That's a really good question. I mean, Lynn, do you have a perspective from as somebody who's deep in the recruiter field?
I mean, that is a very difficult question to answer, because until now it's not really been a concrete thing for people. People have talked about it, but now that it's here, I genuinely don't know what the answer will be.
I mean, I think the issue as well is that there's lots of questions and comments over time about how big is the recruiter world, how many recruiters are there out there, and in effect, that kind of is quite a fluid question, because from an MRS perspective, for example, there are about 200 or so recruiters who we have contact with, who registered voluntarily to receive information about the recruiter accreditation scheme when we first started to talk about the scheme. But of course, there are some other people that are certainly not on our list. But I think the important thing for this scheme and for what we are doing with this scheme is it's not so much about how many people are out there doing recruitment. It'll be about how many people are qualified, accredited recruiters that are on the register that you can buy services from. And there's a really good reason for us to want to have that to be a comprehensive list. But I mean, I'm going to make a guess here. But I would think in the first year or so, we might get between 50 and 60. That's a very much a sort of fag packet guess. But that's, I would consider that a successful result, which would be, thinking out from an MRS perspective, that's like saying 25% of the people that have expressed an interest actually go through to do the accreditation successfully.
That's a good hit rate.
I know I'm always optimistic, but I
Absolutely.
genuinely, having had the number of emails that I've had since we launched the scheme from those that buy recruiter services about the need, their concerns about their GDPR obligations. I think that this is also there's going to be a certain degree of demand led as well as supply led.
So we've got a lot more questions to whip through. We've got, how will we be able to identify ourselves as an accredited recruiter in terms of our own marketing, i.e. email, websites, etc.?
We, in the same way that we do with MRS members, you'll be given those that pass will be given a little logo that they can use that says that they're an accredited recruiter. So that can be used on LinkedIn and can be used on your letterhead or your signature box, whatever it is.
I've had another question come in, which is, what will the pricing be from the recruiter standpoint? And I've got a separate question actually, which is, what is the pricing going to look like from a corporate standpoint?
Okay. Yeah. The way that we are structuring it with the fees for recruiters, going back to one of my earlier comments about the fact that when a recruiter decides they wish to undertake the assessment and become accredited, that they become an MRS member to link into the compliance framework. So the fee is the membership fee, the MRS membership fee, which is at the moment is £154.50. So you will get MRS membership plus access to do the qualification for the same fee. You're not going to be charged anything extra. For the corporates, it depends on how many staff you've got. So there's a sliding scale. So if there's anyone who specifically has would like to know the fees for their organisation, if they email ICG separately, I will actually answer the specific question for the companies to pay based upon the numbers of recruiters they've got.
Okay. In terms of with new recruiters coming on board, as we know, people think that they just can go into the industry and think it's really easy, but how do they get to find out about the fact that they should be accredited in the first place? Will there be something on the MRS website? How else will it be introduced?
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry, Lynn.
I was going to say, won't that be up to companies to say that the people who are using them should be telling them that this exists and that's where they need to go? Would you not think, Debrah?
I think it's again it's really about all parties in terms of on the MRS website we have a page for the recruiter accreditation scheme, which has all the information. AQR has done the same. They have also done a communication out to all their buyers within AQR about the buying of recruitment services and the existence of this scheme. We would hope that other organisations would do the same, including ICG. But also, with all of these things, it's about multiple touch points. You need to be constantly reinforcing the fact that these things exist. And this isn't just about the recruiter accreditation scheme. This is true for all qualifications, all kind of certified and accreditation scheme and trust marks and so on. So it's really going to be all points of contact, really. But also, I think the assistance that we can get from organisations like the ICG, including doing this webinar today, is a really vital part of all of that.
Another question that's come in is, will moderators or fieldwork managers need to apply for permission to bypass accredited recruiters in areas where none exist? Or can I just add to that question, where someone isn't available?
Yeah, well, in effect, they would need to clearly document why they decided not to do that. In the same way that you have to document everything pretty much these days for GDPR when you're doing, why you've made certain decisions, because in effect, this is part of your risk assessment. So you sought to get recruiters that were accredited within a certain area. There was none available, or there was none that are actually in that area that are accredited rather, and therefore you were unable to use an accredited supplier. But I think the important thing is it kind of needs to be noted that process was undertaken, the register was checked, and it was found that there wasn't anyone
process like your GDPR log. It's an internal logging.
Exactly like your GDPR log. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. What else? I think this has kind of already been answered. It says, if a recruiter is not a current MRS member, can they still complete the training and pass the accreditation?
Yes,
And
but they will get membership as part of it. So
yeah,
they won't have to pay anything extra, but because the accreditation is linked to MRS membership to enable us to
the
link it to the
150.
compliance, when
Yeah,
they it's one fee and it covers both the qualification and they get MRS membership as part of it. If you're already an MRS member, and there are some recruiters that are, they will in effect be able to undertake the accreditation for free, because we won't ask them to pay twice for the same thing.
yeah. I'm just going to have a look. I think we've got a couple more questions. Will there be a feedback channel for ambiguous questions if we believe them to be confusing or not correct?
Oh, interesting.
I think there certainly, in terms of if there's a kind of questions that lack clarity, certainly we want to hear about that. The important thing, of course, is that we have developed the training materials are based upon what good looks like. We have had one or two comments saying, oh, this isn't what happens in practice. But we're not training people to do what is already done, because some of that isn't as it should be. The important thing is that the quizzes and the assessment will be about what good qualitative recruitment looks like. So, but if there's actually questions that you kind of think, I don't know how to answer that, because it's been worded ambiguously, then of course we will look at that.
Okay. Would you expect accredited recruiters to raise their fees, especially to company partners, particularly when it becomes a mandatory requirement?
Lynne, do you want to deal with that one?
Yeah, this is something I feel strongly about, in that when this was first mooted, the team wanted to put in that fees would go up. I said, you can't say that, because we have no way of knowing if that's true. The hope is that they will, but there's no guarantee, and we can just bat on and hope that they do, basically. But basically, time will tell, I think, don't you, Deborah?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you know, the way that a market works, if you've got services that are clearly sought after, you would hope that the fees would go up for those that have got the recognition that is being sought. But yes, I when I look into the crystal ball these days, you know, it's kind of, the world is such a complicated place that I don't think I'm prepared to give a prediction. But that is the way it should. You would hope it would work.
Are recruiters able to retake the quizzes during the online training, or is it a one chance only situation?
No, they can do it multiple times. And I think the thing, of course, is that if you have undertaken the quiz and you got the wrong answer, it will tell you what the right answer is. So depending on your memory, of whether you can remember what the correct answer is, but no, you can do them multiple times.
Deborah, I wonder if they mean quizzes or do they mean the assessment, which is a different answer, isn't it?
Okay, sorry, yes.
I'm not sure, but it could be that's what they were thinking.
Well, I'll answer that one as well.
Yeah.
So if you are doing the qualification and you do not pass first time, you can retake. And you can retake on multiple occasions until you pass. But the only thing with that is that there will be a retake fee, because obviously there's going to be additional administration for that, but it won't be the full £154.
I'm not sure I understand this question, but I'm going to read it out. I don't want to miss it out. It's, does the free fee apply to company partner members?
Does the free? Oh, I see. No, because the membership, the thing that I've been talking about regarding the link into membership, is for individual recruiters. So if you're a company partner organization and you have a number of recruiters that work for you, and if they're a member, they will get it for free. But if you are putting people through that are not members, then there will be an additional fee.
Okay. I think that answers all of the questions. Oh, we've got one more here. Do you see this as a start for qualifications for qualitative researchers?
That is a really good question. There's been a lot of discussion over the years with AQR and others, in fact, about whether there should be separate qualifications for qualitative recruitment, qualitative research rather. And MRS has been involved in sort of developing a straw man qualification for qualitative research. The thing that we have struggled with has been how much demand or not there has been for such a qualification. Obviously, within MRS qualifications, qualitative recruitment is a core part of it, but our qualifications basically cover both quant and qual, so there's no separate distinct qualification that you can do for qualitative research in the same way. I would say that if there is sufficient demand for broader qualitative research qualifications, then from an MRS perspective, we've always said that we would happily assist in the development of those. But I think in effect, we still have not seen necessarily that there's enough demand there. Because the thing is, of course, is for a qualification really to have weight, you do need numbers in terms of so people understand what it means. And just to give you some kind of comparison, the advanced certificate, for example, which is our core qualification for sort of grads who become researchers when they leave university, we get about 300 people a year that study for that. So that kind of gives you an idea.
I have a question that's going to be relevant to a lot of recruiters here. It's coming from a recruiter. I have an assistant to help with admin, calls, etc. Will they have to be accredited too?
The issue really is if they are not actually doing any recruitment, because the qualifications focused on those that are recruiting. So if you've got somebody who is just doing support and then never actually does any recruitment, and you don't feel they need to, then you don't need to. But equally, for certain companies, they might actually want their support team to have the accreditation as well, because it means those staff potentially could move across in the business if you wanted them to, but also it's kind of another way of saying that all the people within your team have a really good understanding of what good recruitment looks like. So it can be a positive marketing message about your organisation's services. Lynne, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that.
Well, no, I wasn't expecting that question. I agree with you, really. I mean, I think it's you've got that option if you want it, but you don't have to if they're not doing the recruitment, because it's the key thing is the professionalisation of the actual recruitment people who are undertaking the recruitment process. So I don't think it's necessary. Certainly in sort of one-person bands, well, in this case it would be two-person bands, but maybe in bigger organisations it would be of an advantage.
There's a question that's come in regarding disclosure of recruiter names. So the question, to work out how to phrase it, the question is, will field managers now need to disclose to their clients, their research agency clients, who they are using for recruitment on a project, so that they can check that they are on a register?
I mean, this actually is true of all subcontraction, not just about qualitative recruitment. The requirement under GDPR, any data controller has to have an appreciation of what services are being outsourced and subcontracted, and to whom. They have an obligation to know that. So in effect, the sort of having much more clear communication about who is being used for what service provision in any given research project is already a requirement under GDPR. So if you are outsourcing your recruitment, then you need to say who are you using. But in effect, the data controller will need that information anyway.
Okay. And a few thank yous. Thank you for a very informative webinar, both to Debrah and Lynne. Please, could we have all these questions and answers on a PowerPoint as well? I will try to arrange that for you, but it probably won't come out with the recording and slides tomorrow. And another one saying, is the ultimate aim for all fieldwork agencies to only use accredited recruiters? Sorry if I missed some of the earlier discussion.
In an ideal world, my answer to that question would be yes.
Yeah.
Lynne?
Well, yes. Where appropriate, where as we've covered before,
possible.
where possible, yeah.
And this obviously, I mean, at the moment, this obviously is primarily a UK scheme, but again, you see, we may possibly get recruiters from other countries potentially wanting to do it. I don't know. So, because obviously what we're really talking about is UK recruitment.
Okay. I think that is all of the questions, and we've managed to answer them all as well. Thank you both so very, very much for today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, we really welcome the opportunity. Thank you to ICG.
Yes, thank you, ICG.
And just a reminder to everybody that the full recording, including all the questions and answers, will be going out tomorrow. Oh, one more small question, if we can. If a company partner has a staff member that becomes accredited, will they keep it after they leave?
Ooh, well, the accreditation lasts 3 years. So it will last. They will have that for 3 years. So they will be an accredited recruiter that will then move from one employer to another. But
because it's a personal thing, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
The accreditation, yeah.
Exactly. So in the same way, having MRS membership or whatever else, but the important point as well is that also we will be building in a process so that every 3 years a reaccreditation process will happen, because things do change. GDPR is changing all the time with case law and so on. So it is important that accreditation is not just about how competent you are today, but it's also about how competent you are into the future.
Thank you both again. I think that's it for questions. Just a reminder to everybody that our next upcoming event is the Christmas lunch. Tickets available on the ICG website for £38, and our next webinar will be announced in December for January. Thank you again both to Lynne and Deborah. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.